role has been in developing the Montreal startup ecosystem, and how you have utilized COVID-19 impact insights, data, and research to guide your efforts during the crisis. So I guess, Patrick, I'd love to hear from you if you could tell us a bit more about how you have used, how you use data in developing the Montreal startup ecosystem.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks for having me today. Since I'm not going to have any slides, you might want to switch to full screen moving forward. Up to you.
Okay.
So, how we've used the COVID impact insight survey and the data, talk about that, but also talk about the network. It's first and foremost, we're part of a larger international network within Startup Genome, which has been a great help in the last 2 years in establishing the vocabulary, the methodology to have a clear insights and conversations with policymakers at all government levels. That has been truly helpful for us in Montreal, but also gaining some key insights and making key learnings with other members of the network, the Startup Genome network. And that's why I always hop on those calls when I can make it, because you get to have access to someone in Tel Aviv, someone in Amsterdam, someone in Singapore. It gives you different perspectives, and it brings also the ability to benchmark. And that's the second point I think is really, really important here, is the ability to benchmark on those key metrics, on capital, on talents and jobs, on operations, policies, policy impact, those key factors. How are we progressing versus the rest of the world, and ecosystems that are comparable to ours, right? To Montreal, for instance. So really, benchmarking has been very, very helpful. I can give you a bit of an insight here. We know that 63% of our startups have over six months of runway, versus I think the 30, and that's 37% that have less than 6 months. So I think we know we're in the right spot with that. We know that 35% have more than 1 year of runway. And that's up from 26% in April. So we're able to compare that data with the data from Startup Genome and internationally. How are we progressing? So we know that we're going in the right direction with that data point. For instance, we know that 24% of our startups didn't receive government assistance versus the 38% internationally, right? Which we took from your report. So we're able to compare that data and gain a better understanding of the impact of our policies. On the investment side, we saw a drop of 80% of investments from Q4 2019 to Q1 2020. So that looks a lot like the curve that you have in your graph in the drop of investments. So I'm giving you 3 examples here of data points that we're able to compare with your analysis. And that's been very, very insightful for us. So benchmarking obviously is a key aspect to how we've used the data from your report, specifically the ones from the COVID impact survey. It also helps build a rationale around policy. And it's important to be able to have a level of discussion that is the level that's required with policymakers. They talk about jobs, they talk about economic impact, they talk about economic return. So we need to have the ability to track the data, to be able to have those high level discussions to influence policy. So I think that what we've gained in the insights from your survey is how to build that rationale as well. Why tech startups are important, and that's something that we've built on definitely in our rationale. Looking at the drop in private investments, the cost benefit of policy investments as well, defining goals for government. These are all key aspects that are part of the rationale in your survey that we've built upon to build our own locally. And also, your key policy principles that we've looked at, the allocation of a percentage of cash to VCs, angel investment match from government, and how should government support VCs as well. So all those aspects have been taken into account when we formulated recommendations to government. But also we've used a database for potential avenues to explore policies and with policymakers. We've had numerous calls and Zoom meetings with policymakers from all three government levels in Canada, federal, provincial, and municipal in Montreal. And we got inspired from, in that database from policies that were, rolling out as we were designing these recommendations. They were rolling out in March, April, and May in other countries. We took one example from Tel Aviv with their matching fund with investors. We looked at Germany, that covers 100% of the loans. Loan coverage, matching dollars for investments, other instruments, convertible loans. So these are all inspirations for us that we use to build our own recommendations for policies. So, that's really what, how we've worked with the data and the conversations we had as well in our meetings with the other Startup Genome members, right? So that's, it's been very helpful. Other perspectives, you might have other questions, but
yeah. I guess, you touched on utilizing data, for your own organization, but how important is having data to kind of be at the center point of so many different ecosystem stakeholders when there's government at play, especially different levels of government at play, and then you have, all the private sector actors as well. What kind of insights and leverage and alignment capabilities does data give you when having all these different kinds of conversations?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, it helps us to prioritize and prioritize the recommendations, for measures to implement. And the governments, all three levels of government have been very active since the beginning of the crisis. I have to, hand it out to them. They've been active and proactive as well, and reactive. They've been listening. They've been adapting their policies. So bringing data at that level of discussion has been key as well to help us hone in on the right measures to recommend. Right. It's been very helpful to look at policies in terms of cash flow. Cash flow has been one of the major concerns from entrepreneurs during the crisis, right? So what are the other measures that were implemented in other countries? What data were we able to use to benchmark to be able to promote measures to support payroll, right? And also adapting criteria. We realize that the negative EBITDA, the profitability criteria is something that is oftentimes used by policymakers, and that's something that's a barrier we had to overcome. So leveraging the data from your reports has been helpful in that sense as well, to be able to look at what other measures can we implement that circumvent this barrier of profitability as a criteria. And a lot of startups didn't comply to these the first programs that were rolled out in March and April, and the federal government had to adapt, right? And they had to adapt their criteria to be able to capture some of those startups that didn't show profitability because they're in their first year, their second year of deployment. They have negative EBITDA. So how do you make sure that these these startups are also supported and have assistance from the government? So we've used data in that sense as well, supporting payroll, and also we looked at speed of execution. That's another data point that we also used, benchmarking with other countries, is the speed at which these programs were rolled out. Having access to cash for startups was key in this crisis. So loans through financial institutions, how much time did it take to roll those out? And we looked at what happened in other countries. So that's another data point that we also used to make our recommendations for policymakers. We also looked at your curated, your solutions database, the curated solutions, and the solutions database, and that also helped us in finding examples and again benchmarks that we could use to build our rationale. I'll give you an example. The bringing startups to help directly in the crisis. That's something that we zoomed in on really rapidly in March, April, and we actually did a COVID challenge with a big financial institution here in Montreal, Desjardins. We launched a platform for challenges, for open innovation challenges, so that corporations could submit their challenges for startups to respond to. So that's another example of how we've benchmarked with some of the solutions that you had in your database. Grants, for the type of grants to support payroll. Also community, one thing that I realized is that bringing the community together was one of the solutions that you had in your database. And we really worked hard in terms of bringing the support organizations together during this crisis, and built task forces to work on specific measures that could help startups in the short term. We created a weekly webinars for entrepreneurs. We invited entrepreneurs to present their businesses, whether they were pivoting, whether they were hibernating, whether they were growing, to show some examples and to celebrate the successes, and also to understand the ones that were struggling. So bringing the community together has been very, very helpful and key in the last 5 months. So I'm giving you some examples of what we picked and choose from your different reports during the crisis.